Debate in the Unicam over a bill that would ban gender-affirming care for minors in Nebraska.
Would you consider breast augmentation for a cisgender female gender-affirming? And if you don't, then please explain to me the difference.
And it'll give time for children to grow up. And in some cases, it may give time for their parents to grow up as well.
At least 2 senators are worried about potential legal issues with the bill.
They say it has constitutional problems that may not hold up in court.
Our Bella Caracta explains.
Senators only have a few minutes at a time to talk on the Unicam floor, one after the other after the other. On day 2 of the floor debate for LB 574, Senators Danielle Conrad and George Dungan III, both attorneys, raised legal concerns on the transgender care for youth bill.
You'll throw away the Constitution, you'll throw away your conscience, you'll throw away the truth, you'll throw away this institution to pursue a hateful, divisive national playbook. And congratulations, you're doing it.
This law has a number of problems. It violates the Equal Protection Clause, the Due Process Clause, the First Amendment. Nobody seems to want to talk about this, but we need to talk about it.
While these senators may feel like their arguments are falling on deaf ears in the Unicam,
we could debate this until June 9th. And no one's going to change their opinion.
the federal courts are listening. A similar law in Arkansas is on hold.
That law was determined by the courts to essentially not go into effect because it had a number of issues.
Attorneys argue the Arkansas law violated the Equal Protection Clause in the Constitution, allowing care to be given to cisgender kids, but banning that same care for transgender kids.
This is a law that is at least arguably gender discriminatory.
Other legal issues Langvart rose with the bill include violating a doctor's First Amendment and the fundamental right to care for your own child.
Lots of laws regulate speech in various ways, but one thing that the government usually can't do is regulate speech based on the viewpoint behind that speech.
The debate continues on LB 574 tomorrow, but the potential legal concerns persist. On your side in Omaha, Bella Caracta, 6 News.
Breaking news.